have a very short lecture, just because you've been working really hard on your collages, I hope. And so I wanted to give you guys a short lecture for today so you don't have to take in too much stuff into your brains. We're going to be talking about larger issues in Las Vegas, so we're going to move away from the Strip now that we understand the full context, how it relates to the larger United States. We've talked about urbanism on some scale, and today we're going to talk about it more as far as the actual environment where the desert goes. All right. At the end of the lecture, I'm going to tell you guys how to sign up for DuckDuckShed, so I'm just going to pass these out for now. Does anyone have any questions on anything before we start the class? You can pass them all back. You have a lot of people. So the first thing we're going to talk about is our water source, which is, I think, the most obvious issue when it comes to talking about the desert. So I want to start our conversation by talking about the concept of a watershed. So essentially the watershed is when you trace a single droplet of water anywhere in the world and you trace down its final origin. The entirety of that region is going to be called the watershed. In this case, it's going to be the Colorado River Basin watershed. And so it's the entirety of this area. So we see it has a little bit of Colorado, Utah, a little bit of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and then California. And so some experts will argue that the United States and really the larger world should be divided into watersheds because it's one of our most precious resources, and it's the one that we most often are fighting wars over, right? The access to clean, fresh water. If you were to divide a state or a region into its watershed, it would be a whole lot easier to manage things internally as far as who gets what. But the issue is, you can see that these boundaries here are pretty much arbitrary. They're just latitudes. Sometimes they follow some geographical elements, but for the most part, you can tell they're just straight lines, which is not how geography works. And for that reason, the water around the Colorado River does tend to be a big topic in the general Southwest. And then on top of that, we do have a drought. It's been going on for around 20 years. So all of that is going to lead to a lot of tension in this Southwest area. Now, the common misconception is that Lake Mead is beginning to have this huge, what we call a bathtub ring, that white ring around the edges, because Las Vegas is sucking all the water out of it. But the truth is that Nevada really only gets less than 1% of the water from the Colorado River. Most of the water from the river and the energy coming from the dam actually goes to our neighboring states, and this goes all the way back to when the Hoover Dam was constructed in the 1930s. They did sign an agreement in Congress where we had all of these states come together, and they pretty much divided up who would get what. And Nevada, being at the time, if you recall, there was barely anyone around here, and we had just been formed around 50 years, 70 years prior. We didn't really get a whole lot, and to date, has not really changed. They have tried to re-legislate that and see if we can get a little bit more of that water share since we have grown exponentially, but it hasn't really worked. And so because of that, Las Vegas in particular has had to adapt and learn how to conserve its water and use less of it. And because of that, we've actually acquired the title as the most water efficient city in the world. You guys did not know that. Now, if you look at the rest of this, California receives the most water, and it's because of their agriculture. Same thing with Arizona, Colorado. Obviously, that's the birthplace of the river, so it would make sense. But Arizona and California are states people don't really think about taking all that much water from Lake Mead and energy from Hoover Dam, when in fact they are the ones that take the most. And the problem is that both in Arizona and California, the way in which they manage their water is not as efficient as the way we do it here in southern Nevada. And so it really just leads to a lot of contention between all of these different states, right? Southern Nevada is saying we should get more water rights, and in exchange we can teach you how to manage your water. And California and Arizona are saying, well, we make the agriculture that feeds everyone, so therefore we need more water, and it just goes back and forth. So here we have Lake Mead. This is what we call a bathtub ring, right? That just happens when water has been there for a while, it's depositing its minerals, it comes down, and now we have this. And the rings are a really great way to measure how much our lake has gone down, right? So I told you that Lake Mead is not just the Colorado River, it is also the Muddy River and the Virgin River, and you can see that from the year 2000 to the present, the Overton arm of Lake Mead has gotten severely dry. So if you go down there, there's lots of cracked riverbeds. A lot of the ecosystem has been destroyed for the most part. And that's all because of the fact that, one, the Colorado River isn't receiving as much water. So with climate change, there is less snowfall in the Rocky Mountains. And remember that all of the water that comes into that system eventually drains into the Colorado River, which eventually deposits down in Mexico on the Gulf of California. So the less snow you have up there, the less water everyone gets downstream. And this is part of what's happening here. Now, the way in which we get our water, we have what we call straws. That's what we call them. Essentially, there are these huge pipes that come down into Lake Mead. They were laid out since the first couple of days or years when we had Lake Mead's formation. And since then, we've added a couple, we've maintained them, we've grown the system, made it more efficient. Unfortunately, our straws are now beginning to dry up. So we do have 3 straws in Lake Mead. The first one is no longer usable, so we can only use around about 2 of them right now. Depending on how much snowfall we get, sometimes that might rise up a little bit. But even though it looks like a very small amount of water, when you multiply that times the surface area of the entirety of Lake Mead, that is a lot of extra water that we would need in order to be able to use straw 1. And so because of that, we actually had to unlock straw number 3, which is all the way at the bottom of the lake a couple of years ago, so that our water supply would be secured. So this is what those intakes look like. Right, so intake 1 we saw is running dry by this point. Intake 2 is right here around 1,000 feet, and then intake 3 is all the way at the bottom. If we ever get to the point where intake 2 can no longer receive water, we would be solely relying on intake 3. And if intake 3 can no longer get any water, well, that's when we're pretty much screwed, and we will not be receiving any more water in the valley. And the problem with this, well, I'll just show you a video. It's called the Martini effect. So you'll notice that the area of the lake itself tends to get smaller and smaller as you get down into that basin. So even though it seems like it's still maybe 1,000 feet away, that 1,000 feet is not evenly distributed, right? So the top 1,000 feet might be a lot of water, but the bottom, 1 foot of that 1,000 isn't going to be nearly as much. And so as we continue to drain the lake, it does go down exponentially. So I do have this video which kind of explains what those straws are.
In the middle of Lake Mead, and I have a special guest here. This is Buck Osborne. He is the Director of Operations for the Las Vegas Valley Water District and the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Buck, thanks for taking the trip here with us. So tell us why we're in the middle of the lake. We're certainly not seeing what's underneath us, but what is underneath us 3 miles in the middle of Lake Mead?
So we are currently above the 3rd intake straw, which is the feed for the water source that goes to our latest pumping station, L3PS.
And why was the 3rd intake necessary?
So because of the reduced water level in the lake, we've had a 20-year drop. The people that run the organization saw a need for a 3rd intake. Our first 2 intakes,
Pause. I said 1,000. 1,000 is the sea level, right? It's not necessarily how deep the lake is. So it's actually only around 185, as you saw there. That's where I meant. But the sea level is around 1,000 feet, so that's how we measure the level of water.
the first one is very close to not being usable. The second is only 50 feet below that. So this 3rd intake was necessary to ensure that water continues to flow to Southern Nevada into Las Vegas.
So the lake elevation is about 1061 as of this morning. And that's not the depth of the lake. A lot of people can get that confused. That is actual elevation. So we're at elevation 1061 at the top of the lake. The 3rd intake, where is the top of the 3rd intake elevation-wise?
Top of the 3rd intake is at 875, elevation 875.
So quick math, that's about 180 feet-ish. I don't know, we'll put it on the screen here. So that's the operational depth that we have between the top of the lake and the top of the third intake. And I wanted to explain this a little bit. Again, we talked about elevation 1060 is not the depth of the lake. Also, the concept of the martini glass at Lake Mead, if you're not familiar with this. Okay, the surface level at 1060 right now is obviously wide. It's nice and wide, so we have more water at elevation 1060 than we do at, let's say, elevation 950 or at elevation 900. The farther that the lake level goes down, the surface area gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So while you think that that's a lot of operational wiggle room from the top of the water to the top of the third intake, it's actually not as much as you think. And Buck, tell me, we talked about this earlier, right? We've got the third intake, the top of it is at elevation 875. We're exploring the possibility to take that down a little bit.
That's correct. We're exploring lowering it another 40 feet.
It's all things to ensure that the water supply in Southern Nevada is viable. The construction of this thing had to be insane.
Yes, it was, it's very difficult to build in construction regardless. But when you put the aspect of a tunnel and then a tunnel underwater, the safety factor is astronomical.
Yeah, and backing up a little bit, again, seeing the need here, right? And anybody that's spent time at the lake, anybody that's watched the news and
Alright, so you guys get an idea of how the straws work more or less. So those are gonna be those massive tunnels that are running underneath Lake Mead. And that's the reason that we have water in the city. Right, so we see how critical it is that we learn to conserve our water efficiently, because Congress, more likely than not, is not gonna give us a larger share of water. And then we also have to deal with the environmental reality that that third intake is not going to necessarily be providing us water for very long. The other thing, there's a scenario called debt pool, and that would essentially happen when we reach the third intake. At that point, it would pretty much no longer look like a lake, it just looked like a big stream more or less. And if we hit debt pool condition, the water would literally not flow through Hoover Dam. And if it can't flow through Hoover Dam, we do not get hydroelectric power. And if it doesn't flow through Hoover Dam, everyone else downstream also does not get water. So that's why it's called debt pool, because essentially the Colorado River would come to die in Lake Mead. So that's why it's really important that we learn how to manage our water. And that's also why we also have a lot of experts coming in from all over the world to come study how Las Vegas manages its water. I did want to show you guys really quickly our drainage system here in the valley. So if you've ever wondered what all these water canals lead to, you'll notice that most of them do drain to the east side. Right, so we know that our initial water source, the Las Vegas Creek, the springs are going to be around here, the Springs Preserve is, that is where our water bubbles up. I showed you how the Las Vegas Creek and river runs underneath the highway there. And then if you start to look at where the water canals run, you'll notice that one of them comes in from the north, and it eventually, if you follow it, turns into a golf course and leads us all the way down here to the Wetlands Park. So the Wetlands Park, this whole thing down here, if you live around it, you've probably seen it. If not, now you know about it. That is where our water gets treated. And it goes through around 5 different processes. So they do have to skim, the actual sewage, like the hard solids out of the sewage first. Then they have to let it, kind of sit for a while so all of that comes out or rises out. They have to let the sludge settle, and then they eventually run it through UV rays. It's a really long process. It takes a couple of days for the water to fully get through the whole system, and then it drains into these wetlands here. So wetlands are really important because they're a natural way for water to clean itself. The problem is when you look at the larger Las Vegas and the size of those wetlands, it simply cannot deal with all that much water. And so in order to facilitate what the wetlands are meant to do, we do have the water treatment plant. So by the time the water comes out and is drained into this area, it should be fully drinkable. And some people think it's a little disgusting, right, because it was sewage just a couple days ago, but it is perfectly safe to drink. It filters through all of this area, right? It helps to maintain this ecosystem here for the natural alluvial fans form. So all of the rain that comes down from the mountains eventually feeds into this as well, and you can see there's other canals that come and feed into it as well. That leads us into Lake Las Vegas. So Lake Las Vegas, as fancy as it is the first place where this sewage that is not treated goes into, and then after that it fully drains into Lake Mead. And our water system is so efficient that around 99-point-something% of the water we get out of the river goes back into the river itself or into Lake Mead. So if you've ever gotten notices in the mail about, you have a leak in your system or only water every so often, that is the Southern Nevada Water Authority, and that is the reason that they are so efficient. It is also the reason why roof ponds or rainwater collection is illegal in Nevada, because of the fact that we're trying to get as much of the rain that we can to come back into Lake Mead. And if we have people collecting rainwater, then we're not going to get as much of it flowing back into the lake. We also don't get that much, we only get a couple inches, so it would be pretty stagnant water, and you need to treat it yourself, so it just doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, the second issue I wanted to talk about really quickly was the concept of urban sprawl. So urban sprawl essentially happens when you have a city spread out very quickly and only horizontally and not vertically, meaning that it's not very dense. For the most part, it's going to be just suburbs. And Las Vegas, it's really hard to tell where urban sprawl starts and stops because of the fact that pretty much everything off Strip is going to be more suburban and less high density. So technically, you could say that everything outside of this area, more or less, is urban sprawl.
This is Las
There's
Vegas.
a short video showing us the
The
difference
sequence of
between
images from space is from October 1984 to January 2009, as photographed by Landsat 5. They demonstrate the rapid spread of greater Las Vegas into the adjacent desert. The population of Clark County, which contains Las Vegas and nearby cities, grew from 560,000 in 1984 to about 2 million in 2009.
And we just surpassed 3
From
million.
1999 to 2009, the population increased by more than 1/3. Computing the differences between the first and last images in the sequence reveals where growth has been most intense.
All right. So basically, everything in the black is what was already there in 1984, and everything else is what has been constructed since. So we see that we've grown exponentially. We have absolutely exploded. And we know, based on what the Strip is doing, the Strip is what sets our precedence as far as what development happens and how it looks. And we saw with the MGM Grand, the first one, the one that burned down, we saw with the Bellagio, that a lot of the casino owners and developers have found ways to get around the code. Clark County, the code district, hasn't necessarily enforced them as strongly as they should historically. And so if they let these big corporations and casinos get away with a lot of this stuff, you can imagine that they'll let the greater Las Vegas also get away with certain things. We've started to make the code a little bit tighter in recent years. Recently there was a fire, I believe it was in the southwest area. There was a 3-story house. It didn't have sprinklers. Usually they don't have sprinklers. But the problem was the house was made out of very cheap materials, right? We have a lot of developers trying to make a quick buck, and so they'll use the cheapest materials, make it as quickly as possible. The house burned down and it killed the family. And so the Clark County Building Department has said that now every structure needs to have sprinklers, and they didn't really put a size limit on it, which is really confusing for architects. So I know someone right now that's working on like a little garage addition to a house. It's around 500 square feet. And the question is, does that need to have sprinklers or not have sprinklers? So we're seeing that we're still sort of developing what our codes are going to look like. And for that reason, it's easy to get away with a lot of stuff on these peripheries. As a developer, you always want to save as much money as you can, and sometimes that does mean, skimping out on certain materials that might be a little bit more energy efficient. Now, one of the developments that's starting to happen, if you did not know, Red Rock is going to get around, I believe, 3,500 new homes in this region, so right behind that mountain range where the Blue Diamond Hills are. This is the area people usually hike in Red Rock right here, so you can see it's in really close proximity. If you've ever been to Bonnie Springs before it closed, it's right across from it. So a developer owns a mine there, a gypsum mine, and he wants to create homes. He is the developer behind Rhodes Ranch, which you can see is a huge part of our urban sprawl down here, and he wants to continue developing this region. There was a lot of backlash and a lot of protesting, but ultimately, the county unanimously decided that they were going to let this development happen. So now we are going to get a bunch of development out on Red Rock. And the problem with that is once you let one development happen, Then you can get another developer come in, bless you, and he's gonna be saying, or they're gonna be saying, well, if you let him do it, you have to let me do it, because there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to do it if you let him do it, right? So it starts setting precedents, and so eventually this whole region might end up being populated, which is bad, because these are the Spring Mountains right here. This little area we have where Mount Charleston is, Red Rock is, it's a very, very small little island of greenery where we have our trees that are cleaning our air, helping purify it. They are the ones that are running a little bit of our watershed as well. So if we let people continue to creep up on those, that's not really good news for the environmental consequences on the larger southern Nevada ecosystem. The other thing I wanted to mention was out here. So has anyone ever been to Ascaya, McDonald Ranch? Okay, so you know that they pretty much terrace the mountains out, right? So there you have it, and you can see that by this point they're getting really deep into the mountain. Now the problem is, a lot of people think that, well, it's just desert, nothing lives there, it's dry, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to develop up there. But with deserts, they're very, very delicate ecosystems, more delicate than people realize, more delicate than a forest even, because of the fact that the homes and the ground has to settle for decades, centuries, if not millennia, in order to foster habitats. So on the surface, you know, deserts look really dry. We don't necessarily see a lot of flora and fauna, but underneath the surface, that's where a lot of our critters live. And the Mojave Desert in particular has a lot of endemic species. Does anyone know what an endemic species is? Any guesses? Yes. Yes. Yes, endemic essentially means that it only exists in that particular region. Now the Mojave Desert is usually considered the ugly sister of the Sonoran or the Chihuahuan Desert because our color gamma is very desaturated. It's not those bright reds that we see out in Utah or in Arizona. So it does get hated on a lot, but the Mojave Desert is one of the most special ecosystems in the world because of how many endemic species we have. Does anyone know which plant or tree in particular is our most important endemic species in the desert? Mojave Desert. What's a popular desert tree?
Joshua tree.
Yes, our Joshua trees. Joshua trees only grow in the Mojave deserts. They literally do not like to grow anywhere else. If you try to even bring them into Las Vegas as part of your landscaping, they're very delicate, they don't do very well. So you have to essentially leave that land alone because Joshua trees, with the slightest change in temperature and humidity, will no longer be able to live. Critters, the land, you know, when we have water come in, because the land is so compact and so dry, the water usually runs right over it. It does not seep into the ground. And so that's the reason we have flash floods in the desert, because the water doesn't really get absorbed anywhere in the same way that it would in a forest or somewhere where the ground is more porous. If you've been to the Springs Preserve, the museum has like a flash flood simulator that essentially explains that. But the problem with when we have all this urban sprawl and development is you're bringing in machinery and you are destroying that really brittle layer that's on top of the desert, and you're crushing it and condensing it so that now those homes that would have been there for thousands of years can no longer exist. So that is why if you go out into the desert, you'll see a lot of signs that say stay on the roads, no off-roading, no ATVs in this area, because of the fact that a single ATV could literally crush something that's been trying to build up for centuries. Now, if you look at this area here, if we look at this area here, you'll notice that they do terrace really deeply into the mountain. So they're not just building a house on a hill, they are literally cutting parts of the mountain off in order to make these flat terrains. Now, ironically, a lot of the people who decide to develop out here, they do it because they love nature. And the whole selling point is that you will live amongst nature, you're gonna have an indoor-outdoor lifestyle, etc. But the truth of it is, first of all, just being there is very, very invasive to this environment here. Every time you see a mountain range, that's gonna be where the water is draining and coming in, and we have all these alluvial fans, and if you disrupt those alluvial fans and you don't put drainage in place or replace it in some way, that is where we have more issues with flash floods in the surrounding areas, because it's just running without any collection. The other thing is, most of these people are building what we call, it's a phenomenon in architecture, we call them McMansions, so it's like McDonald's mansions, just because they're a very cheap mansion to build, and it's just considered the bigger it is, the better it is, and there isn't necessarily a whole lot of architectural thought in a lot of these. I'm not saying in all of them, there's some really nice homes out here, but just the idea that you have to terrace out the mountain and destroy all these habitats and ecosystems in order to live this indoor-outdoor natural lifestyle is really quite hypocritical. Now, the other issue with this is that these ecosystems, because they are being developed so quickly, we do have a lot of the native fauna in particular that continues to live in that area. And so, I'm sure you all have seen news reports. If you live in Summerlin, in the areas that have recently been developed in the Southwest, you'll see a lot of coyotes and you'll see a lot of mountain lions coming down. Why? Because historically, these areas in the lower valley are where the water sources are. That is where the water drains, that is where the springs are located. So in the drier seasons, they have to come down from the mountains to get their water, to get their food. And these developments are popping up every 10 years, they're popping up very quickly, and these species have been there for hundreds of years. So when you think of all that put together, you realize why they're coming down. And then the sad part is that a lot of them do get put down because they're considered a danger to the people around them. Other thing, Las Vegas in particular has a huge light pollution problem, and we measure light pollution on the Bortle scale. So the Bortle scale has a couple of different measurements, right? If you are at 1, that is essentially the darkest sky you could ever get. If you are deep in the Amazon rainforest where there's absolutely no lights, you will be able to experience the full sky. So technically you can view the Milky Way with the naked eye. It's just so hard to see it, especially if you live in an urban environment, especially if you live on the brightest spot on Earth, which happens to be Las Vegas. So we're around here, 8 or 9. That's what our sky looks like. If you look up to the sky, night sky on a random day, you might see 1, maybe 2 stars. Has anyone, since the sphere has come around, looked at the sky and what it does around the strip? It like literally changes colors. Every day I go to sleep, I look out my window and I can see like the reflection, if it's yellow, if it's red, blue, whatever it's doing. You can see it because of all the pollution that it is emitting. Now, we went out to a site visit when I was, I think in my 3rd year, and the sphere was still in construction. And we asked them, being architecture students, we were like, what measures are you taking to make sure that the sphere has less of an environmental impact? And the general contractor went, that does not exist in Las Vegas. So it was kind of sad. But basically, they didn't really take any measures to make sure that the sphere itself would have less of an impact on the environment. So we just got a whole lot more light pollution. Now, light pollution doesn't really seem like a big issue to a lot of people because of the fact that it's not really making air or water toxic, or it's not doing anything to the earth. But light pollution actually has a huge effect also on the critters that live in the environment and on ourselves because of the fact that our circadian rhythms are accustomed to having a really dark sky. When you have a lot of light, right, so things like cell phone, TV, everyone knows those things, but also the larger urban environment having all of this light and us being exposed to it constantly does mess with our sleep schedules. It also messes with a lot of the endemic species. So you have certain bats in the valley that no longer come around, or their sleep schedules are disrupted and they come out during the day, which is not good because then they're not hunting the mosquitoes that are out during the day that they should be eating. So it's disrupting a lot of our food chain, and therefore it's going to affect the larger environment as a whole, right? So when you disrupt one part of the food chain, you all should know this, the rest of it eventually, like a pyramid, begins to corrode as well. So how do we combat light pollution? Well, first of all, it happens when you emit light upwards, right? So the worst type of thing that is called unacceptable is this type of light, which is omni-light, and it kind of goes in every single direction, which is basically what the sphere does. It goes in every single direction. These right here are our older models of street lights. They do project upwards and flat out to the horizon, those are still considered pretty bad. In order to have a good amount of light, you do have to create a little umbrella on it so it only casts downwards where we actually need it. And in the best case scenario, you would have timers on it so that at least at some point during the night, you don't have all that light pollution being emitted. Now the problem is, being in an urban environment, we do need lights at some point, so we do have to have these for the most part. But Las Vegas, as we know, is all about neon, it is about excess, it is about competing with the other casinos. And so in order to do that, you can't be having this type of stuff, you have to be having this sort of stuff. And that is why we have come to be known as the brightest spot on Earth. I didn't explain this reference well, but essentially, this right here is all the lights if you look at it from a satellite image. But this right here is how it affects our actual Bortle scale. So you can see that the brightest, where it's white, is where we see that 8-9 style sky, where we don't see any stars. So if you were on the strip, you won't see anything. But notice how far out it goes. You can drive out miles from Las Vegas, and you still will be in this range over here, where you can't see too many stars. I was flying out from San Francisco one day. I think I've told you guys this story. I was flying out from San Francisco one day. We were around 10 minutes into the flight, and we see this huge dome of light. And we were joking around that it was Las Vegas. We didn't actually believe it was Las Vegas until it started to grow and grow, and it actually was Las Vegas. So the amount of light that we are emitting, you can see 10 minutes away from San Francisco. It's a lot. And there we go, the sphere, responsible for even more light pollution. That being said, I do think the sphere is a cool experiment. Being that Las Vegas is already so light polluted, I'm not saying we might as well pollute it more. All I'm saying is we should protect other areas, and if Las Vegas can support something like this, well, I guess at least it's a little bit of experimental architecture. And there it is, the brightest spot on Earth. You can see you can't even read the street around Las Vegas Boulevard. We also see what major avenues have the most commerce. So we have Sahara, where all the dealerships are, and dealerships are known for emitting lots of strong lights at night, which is why this is so bright right here, right? We also have Boulder Highway, where we have some casinos. We have the magnesium plant, which needs to be lit up at night. Now, all of that also contributes to our urban heat island effect. So Las Vegas, I believe, is the hottest city as far as the heat island effect goes. We are the most affected. Heat island happens for a number of different reasons. For one, we do have a lot of asphalt in the city. It is a reason that cities like Los Angeles are starting to make their streets out of concrete because white reflects a little bit more of the heat. This is what our heat island looks like on a random day. And I want us to pay attention to the patterns that we see. So if you go on this website, if you're ever interested in going on it, it essentially shows you what the heat index looks like at different points in the day. So the top ones are the actual temperature, and then you have the actual heat index, which is what it feels like to us, which is what's more important when considering design. So if we look at the morning, we can see generally this area right here is going to be the hottest and the most affected, whereas this area over here is going to remain very cool. And that's interesting to think about because if the sun rises over here, for the most part, the mountains on this side, the Frenchman Mountains, should be protecting with a shadow this East Las Vegas area, and it should be getting hotter on this end over here where the sun directly shines. This is what it looks like in the afternoon. Right, so we see that it continues to be in this area over here, and then finally in the evening, it really begins to heat up over here, and that does make sense because as the sun is setting, it does begin to project more this way. These mountains, the Spring Mountains, cast a shadow over Summerlin at some point, and so they don't receive a lot of sunlight at that time. But despite all of these sun changes that we've been tracking, we do see that for the most part, most of the heat is condensed in this area. Does anyone want to guess why? Yes?
Less greenery.
Less greenery. And it's also the lowest part of the valley, which is where the heat concentrates. So Death Valley, hottest point on Earth, I believe, or on the larger United States, I can't remember, is very, very deep, and because of that, it does have a lot of heat attraction, and that makes it go up to around 130 degrees on the deepest part of that dry lake bed. And all of this is not helped by the fact that we have what we call strodes. So Stroads are a cross between a street and a road, and it's essentially a street that also acts as a highway. So if you think about when you drive from here to LA or from here to Phoenix, you'll drive through small towns and you'll see that there's like McDonald's and gas stations and other amenities placed along the way. And it's not that you get off the highway to access those, it just goes down to like a 45 speed limit, but you're still essentially on the highway, which is now acting like a road. And that's pretty much what all of Las Vegas is. We have these huge roads that are multi-lane highways, right? Even though we call them roads and streets, they are essentially highways. This right here is Boulder Highway, I believe that is Sahara. And all of this is asphalted. And we see that especially on the central and the east side of North Las Vegas, there is not a whole lot of greenery. And if you look at the difference between a street over here and the east side on Nellis, and you look at a street in Summerlin, that is the reason why the heat index on that western side of our Las Vegas community doesn't really feel as hot as it does in that lower valley of the east side. So this is where we also have to start talking about equity as far as urbanism goes, because a lot of urban planners, the good ones at least, they talk about this issue when it comes to different zip codes, different incomes. When you traditionally trace where the lower income areas of the city are, you will find that generally, number one, there's not a lot of greenery, and number two, there's also not a lot of resources as far as healthy food options go, healthy grocery shops go. So when I'm usually in this area, it's really hard to find a really good option that isn't fast food. So you'll notice that, and then as you get closer to Summerlin or to Henderson or to the Southeast Valley, you'll notice that there's more greenery. There's also a lot more Sprouts, Whole Foods, more healthy options, and then also more healthy restaurant options. So all of that is, an effect of what we call urban equity. When you don't pay attention to those things, and when you don't limit development and say, hey, we need some healthy supermarket, or we have a food desert in this area, that's what ends up happening. In Las Vegas, again, because we grew so quickly, and it is mostly based by developers and not so much urban planning initiatives, that's why our city looks the way it does. Now the bright side is, we are beginning to get a lot of redevelopment. Now that we've essentially built up and we're sort of reaching the edges of our mountains where we can't really sprawl out anymore, we're beginning to rethink what the inner city looks like. So Boulder Highway is probably the widest street in Las Vegas because of the fact that, once again, it was a highway at some point. They're trying to do some sort of mass transportation system on it, so we consider trying to convert that interior of the road itself to be a bus route. If you go to, I believe it's Casino Center in the downtown, the inside of that street by the premium outlets has this red color as well. And that essentially is where the bus lines run, and no cars are allowed there. This is another option that they have proposed, where we see that there are more trees, all of that in order to shade the asphalt and hide it from the sun's rays, so we are not absorbing as much heat. Because in truth, if our sun or the temperature is 115 degrees on a normal, hot, sunny day, it should go down to around 90, 85 degrees at night, but in Las Vegas, it doesn't really do that. It might go down to maybe 100. So to combat that, we do have to start rethinking urban strategies, especially on these roads. Now on Maryland Parkway, some of you probably know this, we did have a proposed light rail system. Because it is one of the most transited streets in the whole valley, we did want to integrate this system so it would go all the way from the Fremont Street area down to the airport, and that way we would reduce the amount of traffic flow. And all of that, again, car emissions are bad for the environment, it adds to the urban heat island effect and the greenhouse bubble. So the more we can get people on mass public transportation, especially if it's powered by electricity and not gas, the less of those emissions we would have, and also the less traffic we would have. The problem is, it was considered a little too radical and advanced, and so what we ended up getting was just another bus lane. So that is why if you're driving on Maryland Parkway, there's a lot of construction right now. It is because they are retrofitting the street to go from 3 car lanes to being 2 car lanes and a bus lane on either way. So that way we don't have to go around the buses anymore. So then the question becomes, where do we begin to look for solutions? Because the way that we've been building, if you think about our history of architecture course and all of the different archetypes we've been looking at, and modernism and the history of architecture, all of that does come from a very Eurocentric approach. And if you think about the way Europe works, it's essentially forests, plains, very temperate and mild climates. And that is the architecture that we have been taking and trying to apply to the deserts, which doesn't necessarily work for us. And so next week, we're essentially going to be going through a number of case studies. We're going to be studying regions in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Western India, where we do have desert regions, and we're going to be taking a look at how do they build up their cities, because these are some of the most urbanized parts of the world, and yet they're doing quite well, right? And there's lots of pedestrians out on the streets. They have a very vivid lifestyle in the city without the need for so many cars. So we're going to be taking a look at what they do and see what can we learn from there. And then we're also going to be looking at some contemporary Southwest architecture to see what are other cities doing. Phoenix is a really great place to study how architects are creating desert archetypes that cater to the environment. They also have modernist principles, so they're both aesthetically pleasing, but they also don't have a heavy toll on the environment. We're going to be taking a look at some stuff in California, and that way you guys can begin to build up a little bit of precedent so that as you continue through your studies, being that you are in UNLV, you're mostly going to be designing with plots in the city, with sites somewhere in the desert, and the more you can educate yourself on what that should look like, the less work and the less questions you'll have as you go along in your upper division. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so now I want to talk about ductwork shed really quickly. So this is going to be your jury. I wanted to introduce them to you. We are going to have the director of the collections at the Neon Museum himself, so Jeff is going to be there. We're going to have another Jeff, who is a UNLV professor. He's also the designer of the Springs Preserve. So if you selected the Springs Preserve, you are going to be judged by the person who actually designed it. We have Alexia Chen, our AIA Las Vegas chapter president and design architect. We have Dr. David Schwartz, who is a historian here at UNLV. He's the local gaming casino expert, so he knows more than I do on all these casinos and all the development of Las Vegas. He's written several books. And lastly, we have John Spare, who is a fellow of the AIA, and he is the executive architect behind the Mirage, Bellagio, the Treasure Island, and a lot of the resorts in Macau. So very, knowledgeable panel. I hope the collages are good. But yeah, so we're gonna have the preliminary judging probably tomorrow, where we're gonna select the top 20. It's gonna be myself and a couple of local architects, and then the actual jury is gonna meet next Thursday afternoon, and they're going to be deciding what the top 10 looks like and who their jury pick is, so who the first place winner is gonna be. This is the selection criteria, which was on your handout. So the clarity of the manifesto, if it's evocative, if it's, just a number of different facts about the building, that doesn't really tell us much. It should be a little bit more pointed, more intentional. The coherence, does the manifesto actually speak to the collage? Do they speak with each other, or are they just telling us what we already see on the collage? The composition, so how good does the collage actually look? And then the depth of research and analysis. So did you actually look into the history of the site, connect a lot of dots, connect it to larger issues in the city? Now, Ductwork Shed itself is going to be, if you have not heard about it before, you haven't looked at it yet, it's a 4-day event that's essentially dedicated to the history of Las Vegas, specifically Las Vegas casinos and what the hospitality industry looks like. So everything we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks is what they are going to be doing specific talks on with the experts. I'm going to show you a little bit of their website so you get familiar with it. All of these are events that you can attend. Some of them are going to be free for UNLV students, some of them are not. Here is our architectural collage. It is going to be up. Everyone who attends can vote for the People's Choice Award. So if you are one of the top 10, you're going to have thousands of people looking at your artwork. There's a number of different tours if you want to attend them. You can look through this on your own time. It's going to be from the 24th to the 27th. So on the 24th, that is a Thursday, we will not be having class on that day. The reason is because I want to take a little bit off of your plate on that Thursday to give you a little more time to coordinate your day so that you're able to go to at least one session. That being said, it's not that Duck Duck Shed takes place on the 24th at 8:30. It's just that I'm giving you a little bit more time back in your day. So I don't want to get emails on the 24th at 8:30 saying where is the Duck Duck Shed, because that's all going to be on the next slide. So you are required to attend at least one session for this class, and you're going to have to write something. I'll give you the guidelines for that later. If you go to any of the extra sessions, you can get extra credit that way. So a lot of people have been asking me, how do I get extra credit in the course? And I told you in 202 it's going to be based on attending events and getting involved with the local community. So if you go to more than one, that is how you will get some extra points. In order to sign up for the sessions, you do have to email customer service at neonmuseum.org. And you have to do it through your school email so that they know that you are a UNLV student. So do not be emailing them through your random personal email because they're not going to give it to you for free. From there, write it professionally, have good email etiquette. Your subject headline, just say UNLV student ticket. Hello, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm attending UNLV School of Architecture, and I'm interested in attending, and then list every one of the sessions that you're able to make it to or would like to attend. So the sessions that are free to you guys are Still Learning from Las Vegas, which is going to be more of a theoretical approach to the city. That is going to be on that Thursday the 24th, but it is at 2 p.m. So again, you have lots of different options. It's going to go through the weekend. If you cannot make it to one, try to make it to a different one. We also have one on the history of implosions, so if you're interested in that and how they manage implosions, the history of them, the problems, environmental concerns, you can go to that on 24th at 4 p.m. and you can do both of these back to back if you wanted to get your extra credit there. If you want to do a little bit more of the psychology, more of the fun stuff relating to a casino, they're going to talk about the psychology of carpets and how you design a good carpet for a casino, colors, patterns, how you confuse people, how you create the mousetrap effect. That is going to be on Friday at 10 a.m. If you want to look at how they built the volcano, and this is going to be hosted by John Spare, one of the jury members, and again, the architect behind the Mirage. So he's going to literally be telling you how they constructed it, everything that went into building the Mirage volcano. That should be a really interesting one. They're going to do the Fontainebleau reimagined. So Morris Lapidus was the architect behind the original Fontainebleau out in Florida. Then they brought the Fontainebleau over to Las Vegas. It's the one that was placed on hold for a couple of years and recently opened, so they're going to be talking about that. Morris Lapidus is also a genius when it comes to hospitality. Small little example, he does have his staircase curve in order to make it feel more intimate and more grand. And then as you're coming down the stairs, does anyone want to guess in which direction the stairs float, left or right? How many of you think the stairs flowed? If you have a ballroom, right, you have a round staircase, how many of you think if you're coming up the stairs, did it flow to your left? And how many of you think it flowed to your right? Okay, why do you guys think that?
Well, when you're coming down, it curves to the right?
It could curve in either direction.
Yeah.
So why did most of you choose the right side?
Most people are right-handed.
Go up on the right side and come down to the left.
It just makes logical sense, yes. We typically walk on the right side and we drive on the right side here in the United States, so that makes sense. It just feels natural to go down. But the real reason he did it is because for ladies, your rings, your marriage, engagement ring is on your left hand. So if you come down and the stair is on your right, you're gonna grab onto the handle and show off the ring as you go down the stair. And so Morris Lapidus is a genius when it comes to thinking about how to create an experience where people feel that they are having an elevated lifestyle, they're celebrating luxury. So that is what that is going to be about. And then the last one, if you're interested in sports, they're going to be talking about the stadium for the Las Vegas Athletics. That's going to go where the Tropicana was just imploded. So any one of these is free. The rest of the program offerings you would have to pay for. So if you wanted to do a guided tour, there's like dinner at the Bacano buffet. Any one of those you would have to pay for. Okay. And then that's all I have for you guys. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
How do we prove that we went to the
So you essentially have to write I'm thinking like a 250 word little blurb where you summarize what you learned about and what you think about the talk. Oh, I did want to ask you guys, we do need to have some assessment at some point, and I've been getting a lot of mixed reviews. Some of you liked multiple choice, some of you liked written. So what do we want to do for our third assessment? I'm gonna leave it up to you guys. I'll do whatever you guys, however you guys want to be tested. How many of you would prefer another multiple choice exam?
Put your hands down. Put your hands.
Okay, and how many of you would prefer another written exam?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Come on. Yes.
Okay, so it's changed since last time. All right, so what I was thinking is that maybe we could do our assessment around Duck Shed in some way. So if you attend, maybe that's your assessment grade, or maybe you come in and write something on whatever you went to go see in Duck Shed, because it's gonna encompass everything we've done since we've come back from spring break. So it's gonna be history of Las Vegas and then a little bit of contemporary desert analysis that we're gonna look at next week. So would you guys prefer to have a more traditional written exam? That's like our general questions where I give you like choices of 3 and then you study them and come and do the exam, or would you prefer to have something based around Duck Shed?
Duck Shed.
The Duck Shed? Okay, so I'll find a way to make it an assessment, something pretty easy. I don't wanna make it a hard exam for you guys at the end of the semester. Once we get back from Duck Shed, we're gonna be starting on our movie units. So we're gonna be looking at films, clips of films in class, and we're gonna be analyzing how architecture, the city, and the architect have been portrayed historically, and what all of those things mean. So hopefully you guys can make it to the majority of those lectures. And then for the very end of the semester, planning ahead on that last day when your final exam is supposed to take place, I'm not sure what we're gonna do, but I don't wanna make it like a traditional exam. I don't want to stress you guys out at the end of the semester, so maybe it'll be something in groups or something that is pretty easy, or you just watch a movie and fill out some questions. What would you guys prefer to do on that last day? Watch a movie and fill out questions, okay.
Crazy.
So we might make that the final exam. You just
Crazy.
come in, watch a movie, and fill out some questions, yes.
What about collage?
So for collage 4, I'm gonna show you a different technique. It'll be a little bit easier, and if you want to make it digitally, you can. So essentially what you're gonna be doing is I'm gonna give you a building on UNLV's campus. You're just gonna have an image of it, and you're gonna take the techniques that we're gonna be talking about next week and sort of putting them over it. So you're not gonna be creating a collage composition, you're gonna be rendering out what it could look like. But I'll have more guidelines on that later. It should be fairly easier. If you want to make it digital, that will now be an option. If you want to continue with analog, or you are not familiar with Photoshop, you can continue doing it that way. I did have one last thing that I wanted to tell you guys. Oh yes, so on May 6th, which is gonna be a Tuesday, that is when the director of the Neon Museum is gonna come into class, so hopefully all of you can come to class on that day, and he's going to be announcing who the winners are. We tried to make it at the award ceremony or somewhere else, so it was a little bit more grand, but we weren't able to coordinate a date and time, so instead he's gonna come to class at 8:30, and he's going to be announcing who the winners are, giving you your award certificate and your check, right? Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, if you don't have any other questions, that is all I have for you guys today. I'll see you guys next week.